My name is Lynn Forth, and I will be discussing the cross-cultural adaptation theory today. Cross-cultural adaptation happens when a person enters a new culture, and this culture is from then on referred to as their host culture. The theory explains the process that every immigrant goes through when they enter this new host culture. The theory is very versatile because it is used in many different fields, and these fields include anthropology, sociology, and business. One aspect of the theory is culture shock. Now, culture shock is something that many people have heard of. It's not something new, and especially with immigration, being something that happens much more in our society today. Many people are aware of the fact that culture shock is something that exists around them. And Elizabeth Marks, who is the author of Breaking Through Culture Shock, explains in her book that culture shock is not necessarily something negative. It can be seen as something positive because it is just one of the aspects of the adaptation process, and it's something that every immigrant has to go through. And culture shock happens to every person that enters a new host culture, and it's just something that they have to go through. And one method in overcoming culture shock is doing extensive research on the host culture that you will be entering before you go there. This serves as a good preparation, and it just helps you be more ready when you actually enter this host culture. Now, Marks gives advice to immigrants and sojourners, and she just offers a couple of good points. To have a good and positive attitude and to be easygoing. This helps, people be more accepting of you, and if you're easier to work with, obviously people are going to want to work with you more. Also, to have outside interests in that don't involve your work or the workplace. This kind of acts as a sort of refugee. If the workplace is something hard for you to be in, then that can be something that you look forward to at the end of the day. And also taking a genuine interest in the host culture can be something that is very positive, and it'll help you understand your culture more and be more willing to accept it. And all these points create a positive overall outlook. Another useful method that can be used in the adaptation process is networking. And networking allows the immigrant to become more established, and it also helps them create contacts that they can have and use while they're in their host culture. Now, Elizabeth Marks defines 4 different phases of adaptation. Now, the first phase is the honeymoon phase, and it's kind of self-explanatory. This is where everything is still new and exciting, and the things that might be negative about your new culture are clouded by your excitement. And these negative things are things like different little irritations that you can have with your new culture. So this is the honeymoon phase. The second phase is what we talked about earlier, which is called culture shock. And this is generally characterized by a feeling of uneasiness and confusion. The third phase is the recovery phase. And this is where the immigrant identifies that there is a problem and that they have some adjusting to do on their part to their new culture. And then the fourth phase is the actual adjustment. This is where the immigrants truly accept that they need to adapt to their new culture, and this adaptation actually happens in this phase. Now, every immigrant goes through these phases, and the only difference is that some of them take longer and some of them take shorter, but everybody goes through them. Some might get stuck in some of these phases. A lot of people get stuck in the culture shock phase because they're so initially shocked about their new culture, and they just can't seem to move on from that. But this of course makes the general outcome of the adaptation less successful. Now, there can be some different problems with the adaptation process, and one of these problems that Margaret Pitts identifies is to have unrealistic expectations. Now, of course, when we go into something new, everybody has expectations, and a lot of times these are very unrealistic expectations, and the same thing happens when moving to a new culture. Now, Margaret Pitts did extensive research on this, on having unrealistic expectations, and she conducted a study of 127 students who traveled abroad to Paris to study. And she explains that, these students, the general struggle seems to be the struggle of expectations. And she also explains that to successfully prepare these students for what lies ahead is one of the best things that they can do to ensure a positive outcome of their adaptation. The next person that we'll talk about is Young Kim, who's the author of Communication and Cross-Cultural Adaptation, and he is a front runner in research of the cross-cultural adaptation theory. He identifies that communication with the host culture is highly important in successful adaptation. Now, one of the things he identifies is the language. This, of course, can always pose a problem when entering a new host culture, but this is just something that he sees that has to be broken through. Kim believes that a full understanding of the host culture's communication process is vital to a successful adaptation process. There are many different outcomes of the adaptation process, and to ensure a successful outcome, immigrants must understand the following points. The knowledge of the phases of adaptation. If you know something before you go into it, generally it will increase the possibility of having a positive outcome. If you know that you're going to go through something that has phases, like adaptation to a new culture, then you're more able to look forward to these phases and also identify them when you're actually going through them. And so the knowledge of these phases is really something that can have a very successful outcome for the adaptation process. And also, just a general knowledge of the culture that you'll be going to is very important. Things like religion, customs, and just general do's and don'ts can be very helpful in understanding your new culture before you get there, and just having a general knowledge of your new culture and knowing what to do and what not to do. Also, a knowledge of your host culture's communication process is very important. We all know that different cultures communicate differently. Some cultures use verbal communication as every form of communication, and some may use nonverbal communication as their form of communication. So, knowing the communication process that your new host culture uses is very important to the successful outcome of your adaptation process. And these preparations are all vital in a successful adaptation process. Thank you.